Hello, everyone. My name is George Rain, and I am Samye Institute's Marketing and Communications Coordinator. I am delighted to welcome Dr. David Shlim today for his talk, All I Want for Christmas is More Compassion for Everyone. Dr. Shlim is the author of over 40 original research papers and has written over 20 chapters in textbooks on travel medicine. He has pioneered travel medicine research on travelers' diarrhea, typhoid fever, hepatitis, altitude sickness, trekking deaths, rabies, and more. He also helped discover the diarrhea-causing protozoal pathogen cyclosporia. Dr. Shlim is the co-author with Chokya Nyima Rinpoche of Medicine and Compassion, a book that offers advice from a Tibetan Buddhist Lama on methods on training in compassion for healthcare professionals. In 2000, after moving to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, Dr. Shlim invited Chokya Nyima Rinpoche to teach a conference on medicine and compassion, the first time in history that a Tibetan Buddhist Lama had directed Buddhist teachings on compassion to a non-Buddhist audience of medical practitioners. Dr. Shlim recorded this conference, as well as a subsequent conference 2 years later, and edited the teachings into the book Medicine and Compassion, published by Wisdom Publications. It is with great pleasure that I invite Dr. Shlim to take the stage and teach us on how we can train our compassion during the holiday season, as well as to answer your questions on developing a relaxed, aware mind. Please adjust the size of Dr. Shlim's Zoom window if it appears too small for you. And also, if you have a question for Dr. Shlim, please just write it in the chat message on Zoom. Thank you.
Well, thank you, George, and thank you, everybody, for giving me this Tuesday night. And something I really like talking about is the possibilities of training in compassion, and particularly at Christmas. So if you get any questions come to mind, type them in the chat. I'll try to keep an eye on that while I'm talking, and I'll get started on my talk tonight and leave some time for questions at the end. So welcome, everybody. I can't see everybody at the same time on the screen, but I'll know that you're there. I don't know why that's not happening. So what does it mean to want to have more compassion for everyone? And then what does it mean? Who does everyone include? So that's the title of my talk, More Compassion for Everyone. But what does it mean to have more compassion? And what does everyone mean? If we want to have more compassion, why can't we just have more compassion? What prevents that? What limits our compassion? You know, we have compassion, so we go, okay, I'm going to have more. But it doesn't seem to work like that. And so that's why the possibilities of training in compassion and making that happen are so important. And also to think about what limits our compassion currently. And so to talk about compassion, we need to define compassion. And it's the definition of compassion is in transition. The dictionary definition, the traditional Western definition of compassion is something like sympathetic pity and concern for the sufferings or misfortunes of others. So sympathy, pity, and concern are basically passive words that recognizing, acknowledging the suffering of others, but not, the words themselves don't motivate a response. And so the Tibetan Buddhist definition of compassion, the word ningje, which means from the heart, is more active. It's a desire to relieve suffering in others. So not only do you become aware of the suffering of others, but you want to fix it. It's your goal. That's what compassion is. I think I always felt that compassion meant that. I think many of you do. And now when I go to conferences, or at least when it used to be conferences prior to COVID, you hear this Tibetan Buddhist definition more often. So I think there's a transition, this desire to help. And so up until now, there's in medical school and other kinds of training in the helping professions, there's a great emphasis on empathy, which we can define as the ability to understand and share the feelings of another person. It's necessary in order for us to feel to generate compassion, But empathy by itself is not enough. It's just sharing in the pain of somebody. And if you're already an empathic person, it can just make you feel a little bit worse. And people sometimes worry about people who just too much going home, thinking about the person, the sad thing they saw, the death, and all these horrible things that can happen in life. And so we need to think, okay, so what limits our compassion? We all recognize that we have it. We all feel it at various times. And some of us feel a lot, some of us not so much, some of us are really motivated by it, some of us work in a field that requires it. Doesn't mean we have it all the time. But we always just assume that it's limited. We always just have this assumption about our own compassion that I better watch out. You know, I'm burning out. I can't keep up this level of compassion because the current way that we approach compassion is simply to try harder. And so then we become selective about when we use it. We feel there's certain people are not deserving of our compassion, certain people that we don't like or can't relate to. But we rarely, in the process of our lives up till now, actually ask ourselves, well, why is it limited? That question that I had posed at the very beginning. Why can't we just have more compassion? So there's obviously is compassion, and we want to use it. We feel it's limited, and we're likely to go our whole lives feeling like that unless we decide that there's some way that we can train our compassion. And that's what I'm going to try to introduce tonight. And of course, with people who are trying really hard to be compassionate a lot of the time without training, it can feel harmful. And there's a lot of worry about that. These days, when you hear about compassion from other sources, it's more often to talk about the dangers of compassion and what you need to do to take care of yourself to recover from that. This is a quote from a website that I found. It says, "Caring too much can hurt. When caregivers focus on others without practicing self-care, destructive behaviors can surface. Apathy, isolation, bottled up emotions, and substance abuse had a long list of symptoms associated with a secondary traumatic stress disorder that's now labeled compassion fatigue." So when I saw this, I thought compassion fatigue was just feeling like you needed a break, but this is making it seem like it's actually damaging, and it can be, because people don't have a way to really address the key issues of compassion. So, is there anything we can do about this? Now, some of you have heard me speak in the past. Some of you may have seen the course that I put up, but you know that I was fortunate when I went to Nepal, I didn't put that in this talk tonight, to meet Tibetan lamas and to get personal teachings in this, and found out that there is this way to train in compassion. And then because I was in this unique situation of running a really busy clinic in Kathmandu that took care of almost all the foreigners in Nepal, and day and night, I had a chance to see that the ways that I was training in compassion and meditation had a really direct benefit on my work. So that's my background for those of you who don't know me. So we all have compassion in our nature. In my course on the Samye Institute, we go into why we think that's true and so on. But for tonight, I think we can all agree that when we say the word compassion, I don't think there's anybody watching tonight who goes, God, I don't know what he means by that. I never feel that. One of the things about lecturing on compassion is that all the people who show up are already really compassionate, and one of the main qualities I found in teaching this for more than 20 years is that, in fact, one of the main qualities of compassion is feeling that you're never compassionate enough. So if you like being compassionate and you feel that you could be more, that's good. And then if there's actual ways to be able to be more compassionate to more people by training, then that's even better. So If we can train compassion, what would our goal be? Well, we could define it in three ways: that our compassion could be more stable, it could be more vast or inclusive, and which seems nearly unreachable at this point, but I really feel is one of the most important things that training can give you, is that it can be more effortless. So what does that mean? Well, stable compassion we can understand to mean that you start off in the morning when you go to work, if you're in a helping profession, or any job that you do, or family, or raising kids, whatever, you start out wanting to express compassion, but we wear out. We wear out from the morning till lunch, from lunch till work, end of work, from the beginning of the week to the end of the week. We just find that our compassion is not just stably present in some way that it could possibly become. And then vast compassion, now we have to be careful. We want our compassion eventually to include everyone. And I know that's intimidating. I bet as soon as you say everyone, there's probably about 5 or 10 people that jump in your mind and go, I could never be compassionate to this person. In fact, so, do we really mean that? Well, yes, we do. And we'll talk about why we can do that, but it has to happen gradually. What happens is you think about compassion for people for whom it's easier to feel compassion, and you gradually extend it, gradually include more and more people until you could say that there's really no one who is excluded. And that would be our long-term goal. But you're saying, look, we can't be nice to everyone. And you go, well, why not? Isn't everyone the same at some level? Doesn't everyone want to be happy and free from suffering, no matter who they are? But we don't see it that way. And so because of our sense of limited compassion, we start off by compassion to those to whom we are already connected, our family and close friends. And even then, we can't always live up to our compassionate ideal. But that's the easiest form of compassion, to people that we can connect with and get something back from, and so on. It's much more difficult to be compassionate to those whom we can't relate to or identify with, that are so different. We see pictures of refugees streaming across deserts and jungles and so on, running with their kids on their back and stuff. And yes, we feel a kind of compassion, but we can't quite imagine ourselves being that displaced and so on right now. Although maybe people in Kentucky and let's wish them well, and all the people who just suffered through that massive tornado. But it's even more difficult to be compassionate to those who are causing us difficulty, that are giving us a hard time, that are angry at us. Even in the healthcare profession, you end up taking care of people who are mad at you and giving you a hard time and not doing what you're saying and so on. And then we still need to be compassionate to them. And then, and this is something, I started this project in 2000. So we're 21 years down the line from when Chokyamuni Rinpoche first addressed compassion to Western medical professionals. But I never imagined that we would see such examples of people who are so hard to relate to, that are causing so much harm with their views, that are so mean, and so on. And this has been a real challenge for anyone who is motivated by compassion. How do we fit those people into our sense of compassion? And so we need to get beyond this drawing of lines, or where we draw lines, we have to be able to draw them further and further. Now, remember, if we do undertake to train in compassion, it's training. If we undertake to run a marathon, we don't just the next day go out and run a marathon. We have to train. And so we need to train. So we can't include everyone at once, but we need to start being aware that when we are drawing lines, that we're making a decision, we're making a choice to exclude somebody from our compassion. and not just feel that that's normal because we can't like them because they're not likable and they're doing something to harm us. So screw that. That's what we need to start at least paying attention in our own minds. So why does it matter? Why should we even aspire to be more compassionate towards everyone? I mean, how will that change things? How will that make us feel better? Making us feel better, something to really hold in mind. There's a connection between training in compassion and our own happiness, which I will touch on. So to understand why it's beneficial to train in compassion, we need to understand suffering. Didn't we decide that compassion is the desire to relieve suffering? So now we have to focus on what suffering is. So is there anyone who never experiences suffering? When we talk about suffering, sometimes, particularly in the old days, some older students who I know are listening, no one wanted to hear about that. So then they say, well, it's not really suffering. It's just kind of a vague sense of unease that you live with. That's not, very comfortable and so on. But really, there's no getting around it. There isn't anyone who's not going to experience suffering. And this is an issue. And so one of the things we have to think about, okay, so what causes us to all suffer, all the same? It'd be one thing if few people suffered and everybody else felt good, then we could hope to be one of those, but and so one of the main reasons is impermanence, is that we attach our happiness to things around us, people, relationships, where we live, nature, our children, and everything, and those things bring us happiness, but they also bring us worry, and they also change, and they also go away. And so suffering, just understanding that it's the nature of things to change, it's the nature of our mind, our ordinary mind, not our deep, real mind, but it's the nature of our habits of mind to want them to stick around. And that there's a great deal of suffering in that interface. And so in Tibetan Buddhist teachings, even if everything is going really well, so even if your life is kind of going perfectly, which, occasionally it feels like that for a little while, then there's still 4 things we can't avoid. And that's the suffering that's associated with being born, growing old, getting sick, and having to die. So in that way, every sentient being, every human being, every animal, is exactly the same in that. So as we start thinking about who do we need to have compassion for, you can see how it can start to expand, because we begin to realize that everybody's the same. And so so birth is one, we think of birth as this happy event. I know that the women that are watching and so on, and the men who watched them give birth and so on, realize that can be extremely painful for the mother. But it was interesting to meet the Tibetans and find out that they, of course, they recognize that, but that it's really painful for the baby. We just don't think about it because we don't remember. But if we were conscious and did have memories of being squished through the birth canal and having our skull remolded, I think we would experience that as suffering. But that doesn't move Westerners very much to think about that, but it is in there as the very first step of being born is painful. And then things can go okay for a while, but inevitably we age, inevitably our joints start to hurt, our energy goes down, our vision, our hearing, various things. It can be gradual, it can be a little more sudden with accidents and so on, but there's no getting around the fact that we age. Then sickness, something we live in fear of, can occur at any time. And sometimes it's curable, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes you're told that the sickness is not going to go away. And so This was a woman that I was pretty close to in Kathmandu, Maryland, who was a magnum photographer in India in the late 50s, and was not a nun at that time, but she was at the border and took the photos of the Dalai Lama escaping, coming across the border into India, that was on the cover of Life magazine. And then later became a nun. And here she has metastatic breast cancer and died a few months after this picture was taken, but it was very inspiring. It was one of the earlier Westerners that I met whose training had really been of value to them, and they weren't really very frightened or in pain of what she was going through. And then death is unavoidable, sadly. And so we need to think about that and think about what's the cause of death. So what is it? Why is it that we all have to die? Well, the reason is that we were born. And so the thing about thinking about birth as the cause of death is the fact that once you are born, you don't know how long your life is going to be. And it could be right at birth that you could die. It could be a few months later. It could be in childhood. It could be in a teenager. You could end up in a war. And so we like to think that every human being gets to be born and then has a right to grow up, and that it's inconceivable when younger people die. But we need to realize that is actually just the nature of things, even though it's painful. That's part of the suffering that we live with. And so we can come to understand the fact that suffering is built into our lives. All of us. That's the everyone part. And that can help generate a profound compassion, because everybody who's born ends up suffering in some way, more or less than others, but still inescapably. And so even the people that we don't like, even people that are harming others, they're doing what they're doing because they think it'll make them feel better. The problem is that most sentient beings, most human beings, are fairly deluded about the things that can allow them to have lasting happiness, and the things that's going to cause them increased suffering. So because they don't see things clearly, it's even more reason for compassion, that we could help them to experience the normal things that they're experiencing in a way that results in less suffering. And everyone has to suffer, and no one wants to. And so how do our lives go? I know this sounds funny. I was thinking when I put this up here, but I feel like it's okay for this audience. But we all live in hope and fear. All our minds are always just vibrating, almost like alternating current. I hope I'll be okay. Oh, I'm worried that this will happen. Oh, I hope this is okay. No, I don't want it. The phone rings. Oh, I hope it's not. Hope and fear is the nature of our mind. And then eventually we have to face what we don't want to face. Eventually we have to lose what we don't want to lose. Everybody's the same. There's no exceptions. So if compassion is defined as the desire to relieve suffering, and everyone can't avoid suffering, that's everyone, the everyone in the title, then our compassion should be aimed at everyone. There we go. And so when I first said everyone, I met, a lot of you are saying, oh, you can't mean everyone. But this is how you can reason your way towards the fact that everyone has potential for suffering and is therefore a target of compassion. So what did the Buddha have to say about this? We can't ignore the fact that the Samye Institute is a Buddhist website run under the great Buddhist master Pakchak Rinpoche, who's a close friend. And so this is the first teachings he gave in Sarnath, the deer park. Notice a couple deer in the background there, to the 5 guys that he used to hang out with who rejected him when he went and got something to eat. Anyway, he caught up with them and they said, you know, you look different. You've changed. Anyway, so he said, you know, suffering is this big problem. It's present in all sentient beings. It's a big issue. And it has a cause. It's the mental habits and the way that we form our view of reality that causes us to be attached to things that aren't lasting. It causes us to form negative emotions. And so the suffering is something that takes place in our mind. But I found out there is a state of mind that we can achieve that can go completely beyond the possibility of suffering. And there's a path. There's a way that you can both act and train your mind that can enable anyone to achieve this state of mind that's beyond suffering. So, I mean, that was, if any of us in the audience here are, identify as being Buddhist, then this is what you're training in. This is the basic, these are the basic 4 noble truths. The first time the Buddha opened his mouth after he attained enlightenment under the tree in Bodh Gaya. And so the thing is, what does that have to do with compassion? Well, what's going on in this picture? Okay, this is Prince Siddhartha, born in Nepal to a king who really wanted him to grow up to be king, didn't want him to run off and try to find himself in the forest with some spiritual seekers. But after he led a very sheltered life, but after he became aware that everybody gets old, everybody gets sick, everyone has to die, he just thought, what's the point? Is there something that can be done about this? Can it be overcome? And no one had really ever asked that question before in this eon that we're in right now. And the courage that it took to give up everything, including walking away from his wife and newborn child. And then people say, wait, it's not compassionate to leave your child. And yeah, you go, wait, but it's a greater compassion to try to ease the suffering in all sentient beings. And, in case some of you don't know how this came out, he did come back and teach his wife and son once he had achieved something, as to how to overcome compassion, how to overcome suffering. So his compassion was so great that he just gave up everything and to see whether he could find a way to transcend suffering, not just feel like helping people a little bit. So the really great compassion is not just feeding someone, it's not just housing them, not just being kind to them, and so on. The great compassion is the kind of compassion that helps people transcend an endless life of suffering and samsaric existence. But I only say that because I know that many of you have already studied these things. Otherwise, that's a lot to say to somebody. But it is why the basis of compassion and the basis of spiritual practice are the same. And okay, so now we go back again to this question. Why does our compassion feel limited? Okay, so here's the key. Compassion arises within our own minds, right? There's nowhere else that it exists. But it's also true that whatever it is that limits our compassion is also within our own minds. It's within our own control, our own capability. And that's important to point out because ordinarily we go around feeling that it's those other people that we don't like that are giving us a hard time that limits our ability to feel compassion. We're turning over our compassion to all the other people around us, and if they're really nice to me, then I can be nice to them. But that's not how compassion works. And so we have to recognize that if we want to train compassion, we have to look at what's going on in our own mind. And so our current model of compassion, I think, we talk about burnout and so on, but I think of it more that we treat our compassion is not like a rechargeable flashlight, but we treat it like as if it is. That's how we imagine our compassion to be. And knowing that a battery only holds a certain amount of charge, we don't walk around with it just turned on all the time. If you had a flashlight that you depended on in the daytime, you just wouldn't walk around and leave it on. You would only turn it on when you needed it and hope that it would be there when you needed it. But eventually it runs down and it is rechargeable, so it has to be recharged. And so, however, over years, even that rechargeable battery can't hold a charge anymore, right? And permanence, but also just the nature of the battery. And so that's what our compassion feels like to us. We can recharge it by taking care of ourselves, by getting a break, by getting exercise, by getting sleep, and so on. But eventually, we still have to limit our compassion, and eventually, maybe we even walk away from a field that requires a lot of compassion. So, how do we recharge our compassion battery? Well, the things we're encouraged to do, and you read about burnout websites and so on, is you've got to make sure you're still getting exercise, make sure you eat healthy food, maybe go do yoga, which is relaxing, maybe you have a nice connection with the church, and so on, to try to recharge our battery. But it's still a model in which the battery has finite charge and needs to be recharged. So I think one of the main ways that we really get a recharge is to go on holiday. And I always like this ad because it seems like American Express is willing to help you charge your recharge, and makes it seem like that'd be really nice. So you go to some place that's really relaxing, really beautiful. It doesn't guarantee that you will recharge. But if it happens to be a good vacation, if it happens to actually be relaxing, then our compassion goes up because our compassion is naturally present. And so we call a holiday a chance. Where are you going? I'm going to go recharge my batteries. And so we know that if it's a good holiday, our mind is more relaxed, and we get back, we really feel good and kind for about 2 hours. And I think those of you who've had this experience will know that then you feel like you need to go away for 2 weeks again. So that's kind of like helicopter maintenance. The helicopters, they require more maintenance time than they do flying time. And that's how I used to feel. I used to call myself a helicopter. I needed a lot of downtime for my little bit of uptime. But we know that when someone's relaxed, that's a much better time to ask for a favor. When they're relaxed, ask for a raise. And so there is a connection between having a relaxed mind and our natural compassion being present. So if going on holiday is something that can help increase our compassion, then is there a way to have that holiday feeling without actually going on holiday? Is there some way to train in a way that we can make it an everyday feeling? In other words, by understanding what happens within our mind when we have a relaxing holiday, is there a way to train in that so that we have it all the time? And as a result, could we learn to practice compassion in a way that's not harmful to us, doesn't wear us out, so it becomes more stable, fast, and effortless? So if our mind is naturally compassionate, then training in compassion involves removing the obstacles to compassion rather than inserting or boosting compassion. So we if we don't think about it much, we first start thinking about it, we think, well, I've got to inject more compassion. I've got to think about all the suffering of sentient beings and build up more compassion, build it up like a balloon and use it like that. But if our compassion is already complete, if we already have what's called Buddha nature, then we can access that compassion by removing the obstacles, which are our own negative thoughts and emotions and our ego and anger and all these other emotions that we carry around with us that form a cloud that covers our compassion and makes it difficult to be there. So the purpose of training is to dispel the suffering that we experience as a result of the uncontrolled, relentless activity of our minds. So this Nosho Ken Rinpoche was one of Pakchuk Rinpoche's main teachers. And this is how he defined the purpose of all of Buddhist training. So I think most of us watching this, myself included, is that we experience kind of an uncontrolled, relentless activity in our mind. So if those of us who practice meditation, we feel we can get that under control a little bit, but it's that nature of just experiencing whatever it is that comes into our mind and having to go with it is what covers up our compassion, also covers up our happiness, and makes us an ordinary person who's up and down all the time. So when I said that, whatever that compassion is within our minds and whatever limits it is our mind as well, then this is what we're talking about. It's limited by the fact that we don't really have much control over our minds. To me, it's one of the stranger things, and that I've come to think about is that, we have no problem saying my mind. You have no doubt that the mind that you picture as being inside your brain, which a Tibetan would see as being inside their heart, that mind is yours. Well, then why don't you have any control over it? My mind. Yeah, okay, so what's it going to do next? How's it going to feel a half hour from now? I don't know. I'll wait and see. That's all we do. We wait and see how we're going to feel. So practitioners kind of recognize that paradox and begin to want to take control. So what we need to recognize is that the compassion that flows from a relaxed mind is, in fact, stable, vast, effortless, from a completely relaxed mind. Now, those of you who've been fortunate enough to get teachings from some of our great lamas like Chokyinima Rinpoche and Pakchuk Rinpoche, we see that. We see their mind is relaxed. Of course, and Pakchuk Rinpoche in particular, very animated, but always just stably relaxed and thinking about others. And so is that a big effort every moment? No. As a result of their training, it's naturally present that way. And that's how we can come to training compassion. And then recognize that when we are relaxed, we're naturally more compassionate. And this is Chokyinima Rinpoche, for those who don't know him. He's the one that first taught this medicine and compassion course, and it's his book that I edited his teachings into that book. So remember, relaxed means being less disturbed by our own thoughts. To be less disturbed by our own thoughts, we need to learn to recognize them. And what does being disturbed by them mean? It means engaging with them, clinging with them, wrestling with them. Instead, we want to identify them and learn how to let them go. Thoughts are empty. They're bubbles, they're clouds, but we do not experience it that way. But it's something, this is what part of the training is about. So the training involves meditation, but a specific kind of meditation. The word meditation, as it has spread through the West, has come to mean so many things. And they don't all achieve the same goal. And so it's a technique that trains us to learn to identify our own thoughts as they arise. Once we notice them, we can practice letting go of them, sometimes by looking at our breath and bringing our attention back to our breath. Sometimes we can learn just to have a relaxed mind and watch them and let them go. And And so that's how we start. That's how we start learning about how our mind works. And then when our thoughts no longer immediately disturb us and demand our attention and wrestle our attention from us and make us feel a lot of different ways, that's the true holiday. And so we can sometimes take ourselves to these beautiful places and practice and let our mind flow free. And then our compassion becomes more stably available. Here in Parping, one of my favorite places to do a retreat in Nepal, just to be relax, let things flow. So when our mind is relaxed, then the positive qualities of compassion and also the wisdom that flows with that compassion. In other words, wisdom is a word that means having the ability to make sure that your compassion has the effect that's intended. So a lot of times we have compassionate intent, but we don't do it in the right way. We do it in a way that actually causes some trouble or something like that. So, or doesn't succeed in relieving suffering. So as we train and have a calmer mind, a tamer mind, a more relaxed mind, compassion and wisdom arise together. So the way to picture this is that our basic Buddha nature, our basic mind is like the clear blue sky. And the emotions that we experience constantly in our mind are like the clouds that appear in the sky. So if we're lucky, then, we recognize that there's a clear blue sky. We recognize the clouds form because of certain causes and conditions. And when those aren't there anymore, they dissipate and disappear. No one has to rake up the clouds. No one has to gather them together and take them to the cloud heap somewhere. They form because of causes and conditions. And when those aren't there anymore, they disappear. Our thoughts are like that too. And unfortunately, sometimes our minds are more like this. And so some of the people that we need to have compassion for, this is how they're experiencing their own mind. They don't see that clear blue sky. They just see their mind. They just see the thoughts. They see their obsessions. They see their hatred for other people. So this is part of the suffering that I'm talking about that we can have compassion for, even when they appear to be causing a lot of suffering for other people. Now, if we're fortunate when we meditate, then we might get to some kind of stage like this, where the cloud appears a little bit, we let it go, it's mostly clear blue sky, mostly really stable, or maybe even completely like this. This is an actual picture of the sky. It's not just blue color, but it looks like it, although it's a little lighter at the bottom, right? And so that's what our mind is like. And that's what our teachers tell us. And that mind, that clear blue mind, isn't empty. It's filled with compassion and wisdom. And the thing is, we need to meditate in the right way in order to have the benefit that we want to have. And Choki Nyingma Rinpoche pointed this out in 2000, even when he gave his first medicine and compassion talks. He says the purpose of meditation is to eliminate negative traits in our mind and to promote our natural good qualities. Isn't that what I just said? And we don't need to be hard on ourselves. After all, we're practicing to learn how to be completely relaxed. So the more we train, the easier it gets to be relaxed. So I think it's a really critical point. Sometimes people feel like you really have to force yourself into some kind of state of mind or concentration or meditate. That's why this New Yorker picture is so focused on that little fly, or looks more like a fly than a mosquito there, not while she's trying to meditate. So you want to meditate in a way that is not making it harder for yourself. So the key is that training in compassion is training in how to maintain a relaxed, aware mind while being motivated by the desire to help others. So I've mostly tonight been focusing on what we can do with our mind. There are also, it's very important that we cultivate this motivation towards the suffering of others. Without that motivation, a completely relaxed mind won't really generate that much compassion. So it's a combination of wanting to generate compassion, but at the same time, doing so with a completely relaxed mind that allows your compassion to flow. As Patrick Rinpoche said, the whole purpose of meditation is to see the nature of mind, which is peaceful, compassionate, pure, free of all concepts. So it's just what I've been talking about. I mean, not me, but I'm repeating what they've taught me, but it's emphasizing that purpose of meditation is to see what our mind is really like, to get beyond that endless struggle, chatter, upsetness, and allowing other people to upset us, and covering up our compassionate nature. Just be able to experience the clear blue sky nature of our mind. So then, okay, how's that different than being a spiritual practitioner? Well, actually it's not. Training and having a calm, kind, and clear mind is a definition of becoming a spiritual practitioner. It's trying to separate from being just an ordinary person who just goes with whatever habits they have, just tries to be happy, gets angry, gets better, makes up, does whatever it is. That's an ordinary person. A person is trying to train to have a calm, kind, and clear mind is stepping on a path towards becoming a spiritual practitioner. And Chokyi Nyima Rinpoche had a really nice definition for it. And I thought a pretty advanced definition, given that he was talking to non-Buddhist doctors and so on in this book. The main difference between a spiritual practitioner and someone who's not a spiritual practitioner, the main difference is that when a thought forms in the mind of a spiritual practitioner, the degree of clinging to things as being solid, real, and permanent is not as strong. So it starts to increase. The spiritual practitioner is striving to see things as they really are, not as they seem. So this is trying to get beyond that deluded view that we can be happy by putting other people down. We can be happy by excluding other people. We can be happy by getting revenge. We can be happy. These people that they think it'll make them happy, but it's deluded. It won't make them happy. It's not being that judgmental to say that it's deluded, because it just simply doesn't achieve its goal, but it's all they got. So that's what they go with. We can have compassion for that fact. So if we are just ordinary people, then we just react as we react. That's me, take it or leave it. Yeah, sometimes I get mad, that, and we're kind of encouraged to do that in our, we don't want to be suppressed, we want to hold ourselves in, but we're trying to, the Siddhartha who went off and did all his meditation and taught for all these years, he wasn't trying to just say, yeah, just do whatever you want. It's okay, build up your self-esteem. It wasn't what he was teaching. And so if we strive to be practitioners, then we need to be mindful of our mental state. We need to pay attention and strive to decrease negative emotions when they arise. We try to do that while we're practicing. We try to do that during the day when we're encountering things. And then we can go even a step further, which is to recognize that difficult people that are really unlikable, who are giving us a really hard time, what do? They make us feel angry. They make us feel upset. They make us feel sad. Who's feeling angry? Who's feeling upset? Who's feeling sad? You. Who's making you feel that way? You. It sounds a little bit like Patrick Rinpoche. Sorry, I don't mean to be imitating him. And so it's an opportunity for us to recognize and deal with our own negative emotions, even though they're being stimulated by somebody else. They're still, that we can even begin to see them as our teachers. In Buddhist training, definitely. And we say, if it weren't for difficult people, why would we have to develop patience? And how would we develop it? So in order to really overcome our own negative emotions, we need people who stimulate them, if that makes any sense. If everybody treated us just perfectly, if we just lived with enlightened teachers and friends. Of course, some of you who live in Buddhist communities know it's not always easy, even in that setting, but still, we need to take advantage of the fact that when we encounter difficulties, that we're learning how to handle it better. And then just a couple of days ago, Pakchak Rinpoche put out on the Samye email on Guru Rinpoche Day. He said, this is my message to you on this Guru Rinpoche Day. To cultivate compassion for all beings is the core of practice. So, you think that you're coming to a talk about compassion, and it ends up being a talk about all of Buddhist practice. And that's because compassion is the core of all practice. And I think, I was very pleased when I saw him put that out a couple of days ago, because that's the message of this talk. Training in compassion is just training in how to maintain a relaxed, aware mind while being motivated by the desire to help others. So it doesn't happen all at once. It doesn't happen just because you make that decision. Obviously, making the decision is a great help, but you need to train, and we need to train in meditation and train how to have a relaxed mind, let things go, and gradually more and more and more circumstances we can help, more and more people we can benefit. And then even if we go all the way ourselves to achieve complete enlightenment, we will only do so with the vow of returning to help other people who don't know how to do that. And so that's why compassion is the core practice. And my favorite Buddhist stanza, all the joy the world contains has come through wishing happiness for others. All the misery the world contains has come through wanting pleasure for oneself. So the people that we can't stand, that are so difficult, what are they? Are they looking out for others? Is their main motivation the suffering of other people? Are they causing misery? All the misery the world contains has come through people who are trying to build themselves up at the expense of others. All the joy the world has come through wishing happiness for others. From Shantideva. This was 1400 years ago. It's not like, we got to discover compassion. We got to get back to our roots. It's always been a challenge. And so we have a natural compassion. We need to recognize that, be in touch with it, allow it to grow. Don't give in to our own negative emotions, and recognize what Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche said is, in an absolute sense, compassion is simply the awakened nature of our mind. So if we feel like we're practicing to achieve enlightenment, well, here's news, we're actually practicing to achieve great compassion. If we feel like we're practicing just to achieve great compassion, well, here's the news, we're actually going to get enlightened. So it's exactly the same thing. And that's what's so incredible about using compassion as a way to accelerate and boost your Buddhist practice. So the root text, I think, of training in compassion for Westerners, and of course anybody, but that's who it was taught to and adapted to, is this book, Medicine and Compassion. People think of it as my book. I just edited his teachings, just like any other of Chokyi Nyima Rinpoche's books are edited from his teachings. So I highly recommend it. Because it's so profound, he chose to teach compassion in a very profound way, talking about non-conceptual compassion and things like that. And so I wrote a study guide a few years ago, which is free on my website there, to be downloaded as a PDF. And it goes chapter by chapter, trying to hold your hand and guide what I think are some of the key points that you can get out of each chapter of that. And of course, I've put this all into a 7-week course, don't have to do it week to week, but a multi-part slideshow course just like this and on the Samye Institute in Training in Compassion, which goes into much more detail and fills in some of the things that I've glossed over tonight. But really my effort to try to help people understand why it is that compassion can be trained and the great benefit of doing so. And on top of that, George is working really hard to create a method of providing gift certificates, not only to my course. Of course, you'd want to buy it somebody my course, because then that's a really cool thing to do for somebody, but all the courses on Samye Institute now, not yet, but he hopes by the end of the week or really soon, and he'll send you an email if you're watching this talk. You could, in time for Christmas, send somebody a free course in Training in Compassion or something else. And what a meaningful gift, right? I think that's a great thing that they're doing. And so that's me. That's it. Happy holidays to all of you. I don't know that I've ever given a holiday-themed Buddhist talk before, but it seems to fit. And I have a few questions that have popped up here, so I will go back if you want to put me on main speaker view or something like that. Okay. So let me look at the chat here. So one of the things, one of the hardest things, and the question came up, someone had also sent in a question earlier about how do we work with people who are causing so much harm or such difficult people? And I don't have an easy answer for that. But I do want to say one thing is that we need to maintain our own compassion. We need to avoid experiencing anger. We need to avoid letting other people control the stability of our mind. From a strictly Buddhist practitioner point of view, we are very fortunate to have this precious human birth. I think we're all humans. There's maybe a few dogs watching but they're watching with their humans. They don't know how to turn this on and get on Zoom by themselves and so on. Might be some cats too. But we have this precious human birth. We have connected with some Buddhist teachings. We're open-minded to them and so on. And so we cannot let anybody derail us. So even the difficulty, this happened and 2 elections ago, people were very upset. Some people were upset, some people were really happy. But we can't let our frustration with the way things are going throw us off our own path. And we see that in our own teachers. And we go, well, what do our teachers know about what's going on now? Look at the democracies going away and all these horrible things with immigration and racism and all this stuff. And you go, wait a second. Didn't they lose their whole country? Didn't they just get murdered? Didn't they get imprisoned in concentration camps for 20 years? Didn't they have to flee with only the clothes on their back? And I'm talking about our Tibetan teachers. And so they know, and they're examples. So all I can say is that you definitely need to work towards human justice and civil rights and everything, but without experiencing it as anger or hatred yourself. It's even okay to act angry in the interest of helping others if you're not really angry. I think some of us have seen that in our teachers. Someone said, oh, Pacha Rinpoche was so mad at me. Well, do you think he's really mad? Or do you think he's just acting mad because you need to hear that way? It's the only way you hear it. So I think when you see a little toddler sticking a fork in an electric outlet, you go, oh, honey, don't do that. Don't stick that fork in that outlet. You go, no. But it's not because you don't like them or you're really angry at them. So So that's all I can say. You need to work towards the things that you care about, but at the same time, you have to not give in to your own anger and lose your own compassion. And you say, well, how can you have compassion for people like that? Well, that's what I was trying to cover a little bit earlier. They're human beings. They're trying to be happy. They don't know how. And they're through their actions. And if we believe in karma, they will suffer a lot in the future from the suffering that they're causing other people and so on. So we don't have to jump on that as well. But we can try to do our best to help others. And then someone had written in, I think it was a pretty specific question about a family gathering, and some of the family didn't want to come this year, and they're upset and say, how can I have compassion about that? Well, too many variables here for me to give really good advice. I mean, were they worried about COVID? Do they just really not like their family? But if someone chooses not to come to a family gathering, then you have to kind of figure out that why, and be kind and say, okay, if you don't want to come, it's okay. It's kind of a selfishness to want to gather your family around you and have them come and be. And sometimes, a lot of family dynamics are not always perfect. So I really thought a lot that someone wrote this question when they signed up for the course. And I think the main thing is just to think, what is your motivation? Is it because you feel hurt, or are they really worried? They've got kids in school and maybe they're scared they'll infect you. There's just a lot going on with COVID that adds to the difficulty of family gathering. And then someone else said that they have a job that makes them have to work really fast pace. So how can you maintain compassion in a fast-paced environment? Well, I don't know if that's fast-paced barista or fast-paced ICU nurse with COVID patients or not, but it's the same. You train when you're not at work. This whole thing about training in compassion, learning to empty your mind, let go of things, you have to do it when you're not under pressure, when you're not stressed. And that's why we practice. Then we carry that with us. We try to utilize that when we're walking in the room to see somebody who's a patient who's really sick, maybe has not a very good prognosis or something, and you clear your mind and let yourself have a genuinely compassionate attitude. When you encounter someone with a genuinely compassionate attitude, you feel automatically so good. You recognize it right away. And we want to provide that for others. It's what we really could aspire to. People feel that, whether you're in a helping profession, whether you're just walking down the street, whether you work in an office, whether you've got children, whatever it is. A question just came up on is physically getting tired, and and that's sapping your compassion. Well, yes, and in Chokyamuni Rinpoche's book, in Pakchak Rinpoche teaching at the Medicine and Compassion retreats that I put on, in the 52 videos that are on my website, you can access of course they recognize that physically we tire out and we have to take care of ourselves. We have to try and get sleep. We have to stop when we can't do it anymore. The advantage of training in compassion is that with a naturally compassionate attitude, with openness and taking less effort, then we'll go longer before we physically get tired. But and that's how it can work. But there's no way around that. We have human bodies, we get tired, and we have to live with that. Even, if anyone has sat in Chokyamuni Rinpoche's chambers or something like that, and 150 people will come in straight in a row, he's still kind to everyone, but you can see him getting tired, and you can see that, that's normal, that's being a human being. But the more that we can listen with great attention, focus on their problems, and then let it go right away afterwards without clinging to it ourselves, then our compassion can be sustained throughout the day. So that is the questions. I don't know, George, is there any way for people to unmute themselves and ask any questions that
Certainly, if anybody has a question they'd like to ask, if they could just unmute themselves and you can ask Dr. Shlim.
Well, I'm glad I answered every one. Anyway, I wish you all a wonderful holiday season. I wish you the fortitude to maintain your vigilance about COVID, about encouraging other people to protect themselves in rational ways through vaccination and mask wearing and so on. You know, despite the vigor with which people oppose common sense, it doesn't eliminate the fact that it's still common sense, you know. And so, and I really look forward to the time when we can, I'm glad that we can meet online like this. I'm getting used to it. I taught a whole medical school course online, and I may have to do that again this year because in Ireland. But I really look forward when we can be together and getting teachings from our genuine teachers and grow in that way in our closeness. So if there's no other questions or anything, thank you for tuning in. Take the course if you want to learn more about it. Buy the course for someone else if you want them to learn more about it. But my goal is to help establish in the West the idea that compassion is something that can't be trained and not just something that we're kind of stuck with based on our upbringing and based on everything else, that it can really change. And through a lot of people training in compassion, just the general overall feeling of compassion can grow. And wouldn't that be a worthwhile goal? Okay, so we'll see you guys when we see you. And thanks again.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shlim. Everybody can now unmute themselves.